You know, in a case like Juana's, she's really showing us this queer spirit of queerness surviving and thriving anywhere. You try to pave over it with concrete, but it's just these roots of a tree that ultimately are going to be stronger than anything else, including the concrete that is trying to keep it down. I'm so fancy. I put on a lot of makeup and all of that.
Yeah, well, you know, that's what people expect of authors, is fancy.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, I was reading Queer There and Everywhere, and one of the things that really stuck out to me is how the expression of gender identity and sexuality was changed or shaped by the presence of white Christian European colonialism, how that really impacted cultures all over the world.
I think this is like the biggest part of queer history that people don't know, because they might think that our history is really tragic, which it is in parts, because of all of the persecution by Christians in part. But if you go pre-colonial, there's actually this whole other time that is less talked about, of an incredible amount of diversity around sexuality and gender identity and expression. And the way that we know this, in part, unfortunately, is sometimes just from the first records that we have of a certain culture might be Europeans' comments when they encounter them and saying, the men here sleep with other men, that's a disgusting abomination, and we'll make sure to change that. And that's the record that we have about, you know, the hundreds of years of this people. I'm talking about literally the entire world, islands in the Pacific, all over the continent of Africa, all over Latin America, all over Asia, all over North America. So many different types of queerness, sexualities, and genders that don't fit into our modern understanding of the heteronormative existence that this colonialism created. So, for example, in the United States, queer history begins with Two-Spirit people, who were Native Americans who embodied male and female in one person. And this was seen as a holy, special gift. And they were leaders in their communities who were revered for having this wonderful gift, which is, of course, very different than the way the colonists saw it when they arrived.
You do mention a couple places in the book that expressions of queerness did survive colonialism in some places.
Yeah, so one example is the Bugis of Indonesia. They still have a culture where the norm is 5 genders, like the norm in our culture is 2 genders. Of the countries that criminalize homosexuality today, most of them are former British colonies. Most of them are following laws from hundreds of years ago that the United Kingdom doesn't have anymore, but have been on the books in that country for hundreds of years now. It's interesting because you'll see people only look to the more recent history of these countries, and when anti-homosexuality laws are being passed, I've seen this in photos from protests from a few different countries in Africa. You'll see a sign that says homosexuality is un-African. And there's this idea that this is a white Western import, homosexuality is. And when in fact, if you look to the history of Africa pre-European invasion, there is an incredible amount of homosexuality, for lack of a better word, because that's what's being criminalized now. The actual Western import is homophobia, not homosexuality.
One of the stories that broke my heart that I thought was just one of the most beautiful in the book, and I think relates to this topic, is the story of the poet Nun.
Yeah, so Juana Inés de la Cruz from Mexico is one of a few people of faith in the book, and for her, she wanted to pursue an education and a life that didn't involve marriage to a man, and that meant entering a convent, and that was the only option besides getting married, and women weren't allowed to go to college. So she was able to study and pursue poetry and studies of sciences and more, Latin, so much. She was so into learning and was one of the most educated women in the world for her time.
Well, to me, it strikes me as like a testament to the way that queerness has always been subversive in Western European culture. For all of that it was repressed, it never went away, and it managed to find expressions within Western European culture that ironically subverted the very power structures and cultural systems that were trying to repress them.
Yeah, I mean, the subtitle is 23 People Who Changed the World, and there are a lot of different ways to change the world besides being the ruler of a country like a few of those people were, or an inventor like Alan Turing that made something like the computer that it's indisputable that it's changed the world. But people change the world in so many different ways. Maybe in Mercedes' case, more by influencing other change makers. Christina of Sweden is like my favorite person ever, in part because they have a happy ending to their life. A butch lesbian can see themselves reflected in Christina, and a trans man can see themselves reflected in Christina, and a bi kid can see themselves reflected in Christina. And whether or not Christina fits into those boxes exactly, the whole point is that now any of those people who can see a piece of themselves in Christina have a role model of a life of courage and authenticity and success. And also, it's just like a throwaway line, also brought peace to their country that they led. Yeah, Greta Garbo was with Mercedes de Acosta when filming Queen Christina, and in Queen Christina, Greta kisses another woman who's playing the character of Ava Spar, and has these amazing lines, is wearing pants, says, and is being pressured to marry, and the advisor says, "You cannot die an old maid," and Greta Garbo as Christina goes, "I won't, I intend to die a bachelor." And it's 1930s. 1930s. Thanks so much. It was awesome to talk with you, Eric, and I really appreciate you taking the time to read the book and talk about it today. And I'm super excited to share it with more people now that it's out.
It's awesome. Everyone should go read it.
The book's available wherever you usually get books. So Amazon, your bookstore, etc. And all the links are at sarahprager.com/queer there. I don't know why I keep doing that. It's such a door. I do it a door.